The fastest way to change your life is to let the wrong person walk through your front door, or the right one. I always thought my summer would be predictable. My college classes had ended, my part-time design internship was on pause, and I finally had 3 quiet months ahead of me before another demanding semester began. My plan was simple: sleep late, finish the stack of novels sitting beside my bed, spend afternoons sketching in the backyard, and enjoy the rare luxury of having absolutely nothing urgent to do. That plan lasted exactly until I walked into my family's living room and found a stranger carrying 2 large suitcases through the front door. Well, not exactly a stranger. Logan Hayes had been my older brother Mason's best friend for as long as I could remember. Growing up, he had been the tall high school senior who occasionally came over to watch football games, help Mason repair his old pickup truck, or disappear into the garage with him for hours while they worked on one project after another. Back then, I had been the annoying little brother who mostly stayed out of their way. Years passed. Mason graduated, Logan moved away for college, and life quietly carried everyone in different directions. I had not seen him in nearly 6 years. "Ethan," perfect timing, my mother called cheerfully from the kitchen. "Come help Logan bring the rest of his things inside." I stood frozen for a second longer than I probably should have. Logan looked different now. He was older, broader across the shoulders, dressed in dark jeans and a navy button-up shirt with the sleeves casually rolled to his forearms. His blonde hair was slightly longer than I remembered, and there was a calm confidence in the way he carried himself that had not existed when he was barely out of high school. Then he smiled. "You must be Ethan," he said with an amused laugh. "You definitely are not 12 anymore." I could not help laughing. Hopefully that surprises everyone. He extended his hand. "It is good to see you again." His handshake was firm but relaxed, and for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly became very aware that I was still standing in the middle of the hallway staring at him. I quickly cleared my throat. "Welcome to the house." Mason appeared from upstairs carrying another box. "I probably should have mentioned this before," he said. "Logan accepted an architectural position downtown. His apartment will not be ready for another couple of months, so Mom and Dad offered him the guest room." "A couple of months?" I repeated before I could stop myself. Mason grinned. "Do not sound so excited." Everyone laughed except me. Not because I was unhappy, but because I had expected my peaceful summer to remain exactly the way I imagined it. Instead, my daily routine had changed in less than 5 minutes. The rest of the afternoon disappeared beneath cardboard boxes, moving blankets, and conversations about furniture, traffic, and Logan's new job. I learned he would be working for a respected architecture firm in Seattle, that he had driven nearly 800 miles to accept the opportunity, and that he was grateful my parents had offered him a temporary place to stay. Every answer sounded thoughtful, polite, and sincere. He thanked my mother every time she offered food. He insisted on carrying the heaviest boxes himself. He even apologized after accidentally leaving muddy footprints near the back door and immediately cleaned the floor before anyone else noticed. By sunset, the guest room looked lived in. The moving truck had disappeared, and the entire family gathered around the dining table for homemade lasagna. Conversation flowed naturally as Mason joked about old memories while my parents asked Logan about work. I mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment, although I caught myself watching him more often than I intended. There was something unexpectedly comforting about his presence, something steady that quietly changed the atmosphere inside our home without demanding attention. Later that night, after everyone had gone upstairs, I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water and found Logan standing by the back window looking out across the peaceful yard. He turned as I entered and smiled. "Thank you for helping today," he said. "I know having someone suddenly move into your house is not exactly convenient." I shrugged with a small smile. "I guess my summer just became a little less predictable." He laughed softly, hopefully not in a bad way. Looking back now, I realized that was the exact moment everything truly began, because neither of us had any idea that the ordinary house we were standing inside would quietly become the place where both of our lives would change forever. The next morning I woke earlier than usual because unfamiliar sounds drifted up from the kitchen. Cabinets opened and closed, dishes clinked softly, and the rich smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the hallway outside my bedroom. Normally the house stayed quiet until my father left for work, but curiosity pulled me downstairs before I even finished waking up. Logan stood at the kitchen counter wearing a simple gray t-shirt and dark athletic pants. carefully pouring pancake batter into a skillet while my mother sliced fresh strawberries beside him. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, making the entire room feel warmer than usual. He looked up as I entered and smiled. "Good morning, Ethan. I hope you like pancakes." I blinked in surprise. "You are cooking breakfast?" He laughed quietly. "Your mom offered, but I figured I should contribute while I am staying here." My mother smiled without looking up from the cutting board. "He has already unloaded the dishwasher and taken out the trash before either of us came downstairs." I glanced at Logan with genuine surprise. "You have been awake that long?" He shrugged casually. "Moving into a new place always wakes me up early." Breakfast felt surprisingly comfortable. My father asked Logan about his first day at the architecture firm. Mason teased him about always waking up before everyone else, and I mostly listened while stealing occasional glances across the table. He answered every question thoughtfully, laughed easily, and somehow made himself feel like part of the family without ever trying too hard. After breakfast, my parents left for work while Mason headed out to meet friends, leaving only Logan and me inside the house. The silence felt awkward for exactly 3 seconds. "I was thinking about exploring the neighborhood," Logan said. "Would you mind pointing me toward the nearest grocery store?" "I can show you," I answered before thinking twice. We walked through our quiet Seattle neighborhood beneath clear blue skies, passing tree-lined streets, neighborhood cafes, and small bookstores that had always been part of my everyday life. Logan asked about my graphic design program, my favorite places around the city, and what I hoped to do after graduation. Unlike many adults who asked polite questions only to change the subject, he actually listened to every answer. When I admitted I dreamed of illustrating children's books one day, his expression brightened. "That sounds like meaningful work," he said sincerely. "You would create something that stays with people for years." His response caught me off guard. Most people simply called it a nice hobby before asking what my real career plan was. We returned home carrying grocery bags filled with vegetables, coffee beans, and ingredients for dinner. While putting everything away, I accidentally reached for the same carton of milk at the exact moment Logan did. Our hands brushed for only an instant before we both stepped back. "Sorry," we said simultaneously. We laughed, and the awkwardness disappeared almost immediately. "Looks like we need kitchen traffic rules," Logan joked. "Agreed," I replied. "Otherwise somebody is eventually going to spill something." The afternoon passed quietly. I worked on digital illustrations in the dining room, while Logan reviewed architectural drawings across the table. Every so often one of us asked the other for an opinion. He wanted feedback on colors for a presentation. I asked whether a building in one of my background sketches looked realistic. Without realizing it, we slipped into an easy rhythm that felt strangely natural for two people who had barely spoken in years. That evening, while helping my mother prepare dinner, she smiled knowingly. "Logan seems easy to live with." I nodded while arranging vegetables on a serving tray. "Yeah, he really does." She looked at me for a second longer before returning to the stove. "Sometimes the people who unexpectedly enter your daily routine end up teaching you something you never knew you needed." I laughed and dismissed the comment as one of my mother's usual observations. But as I watched Logan setting the dining table with effortless kindness only a few minutes later, I quietly wondered why his presence already felt less like having a guest in the house and more like someone who somehow belonged there. Over the next several days, our house settled into a new rhythm that none of us had expected. Logan left for work just after 7 every morning, always carrying a travel mug of coffee and a neatly organized messenger bag filled with architectural drawings. I usually wandered downstairs 30 minutes later, still waking up, only to find a handwritten note beside the coffee maker telling everyone to have a good day. It was a small habit, but somehow it made the kitchen feel warmer before anyone even spoke a word. By the end of the first week, those little notes had become something I quietly looked for every morning. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting on the back patio working on a digital illustration when Logan returned home earlier than expected. He loosened his tie, set his bag beside the sliding glass door, and let out a long breath before smiling when he noticed me. "Long day?" I asked. "Not a bad one," he answered. "Just a lot of meetings." He walked over to the patio table and glanced at the drawing displayed on my tablet. It showed a cozy neighborhood bookstore surrounded by flowering trees. He studied it for a few seconds before saying, "Your perspective lines are excellent, but I think the front entrance could feel more inviting if the awning extended a little farther." I looked up in surprise. You noticed that? He laughed softly. Architecture and illustration are cousins. We both spend our time trying to make people feel something when they look at a space. His comment stayed with me long after he went inside to change clothes. No professor had ever described my work that way. Later that evening, I adjusted the drawing exactly as he suggested, and somehow the entire image immediately felt more welcoming. It was a simple change, yet it made me realize how naturally we complemented each other's ways of thinking. A few days later, my mother asked whether someone could help reorganize the garage before the weekend. Mason claimed he already had plans. My father was working overtime. And before I could volunteer, Logan quietly said, "Ethan and I can handle it." The project took most of Saturday morning. We sorted old gardening tools, repaired loose shelves, and carried dozens of storage boxes into the attic. Every so often, Logan found something that reminded him of his teenage years with Mason. An old baseball glove made him laugh. A faded camping lantern brought back memories of summer trips they had taken together. Listening to those stories, I realized I knew very little about the years before I was old enough to pay attention. At one point, we discovered a dusty wooden box filled with family photographs. Logan carefully picked up one picture showing Mason, himself, and a much younger version of me sitting on the front porch eating ice cream. I could not have been more than 10 years old. "You always followed us everywhere," Logan said with an amused smile. I looked closer at the picture. "I barely remember this." "I do," he replied. "You insisted on telling us about every book you were reading, even when neither of us understood half the stories." I laughed. "That sounds embarrassing." He shook his head. "Actually, it was kind of impressive." We finished cleaning the garage by late afternoon and sat on the back steps drinking cold lemonade while enjoying the quiet neighborhood. The conversation drifted from architecture to movies, then to music, travel, and childhood memories. Hours passed without either of us noticing. When my mother stepped outside to call us for dinner, she looked at the organized garage before smiling with obvious satisfaction. "You two make a surprisingly good team," she said. Logan glanced toward me with a relaxed grin. I was thinking exactly the same thing. For reasons I could not fully explain, hearing those words left me smiling long after the conversation had ended, because somewhere between handwritten morning notes, shared projects, and effortless conversations, Logan had quietly stopped feeling like my brother's guest and started feeling like someone whose presence I looked forward to every single day. About 2 weeks after Logan moved into our house, something happened that quietly changed the way I looked at him. It was nothing dramatic. There was no grand confession, no unforgettable accident, and no moment that belonged in a movie. It was simply an ordinary Tuesday evening when the power suddenly went out across our neighborhood. The lights disappeared without warning, leaving the entire house wrapped in darkness before my mother found several candles stored inside a kitchen cabinet. My parents decided to visit our neighbors to check whether everyone was all right, while Mason left to help a friend whose car had stalled nearby. Before long, only Logan and I remained inside the house. We carried 2 candles into the living room, where soft golden light flickered across the bookshelves and family photographs lining the walls. Rain tapped gently against the windows as the quiet settled around us. "Well," Logan said with a small smile, "I guess the internet has officially taken the evening off." I laughed. I forgot people survived before wireless connections existed. He leaned back comfortably on the couch. "Barely. For a while we simply talked. Without television, phones, or computers demanding attention, the conversation drifted naturally from one subject to another. Logan asked about my childhood, and I admitted that I had always been the quieter sibling, while Mason somehow became friends with everyone he met. "You were always different," Logan said thoughtfully. "Even back then." I looked at him with curiosity. "You actually remember me that well?" He nodded without hesitation. "Of course. You were always carrying a sketchbook around the house. Sometimes I would come over looking for Mason, and I would find you sitting on the back porch drawing trees or birds instead." I smiled. "I cannot believe you remember something that small." "People remember kindness more than they realize," he replied softly. "Whenever I accidentally interrupted you, you always smiled and showed me whatever you were drawing." His answer caught me completely off guard because I had almost forgotten those afternoons myself. The rain grew heavier outside while candlelight reflected across the wooden coffee table between us. After a comfortable silence, I asked the question that had quietly stayed in my mind since he arrived. Why Seattle? Logan rested his hands around a warm mug of herbal tea before answering. I received offers in Portland and Denver too. He looked toward the rain-covered window. Seattle reminded me of a place where I once felt happy. I frowned slightly. Because of Mason? He smiled, but there was something more thoughtful in his expression. Partly. Your family always made people feel welcome. During college and my first years working, I moved from apartment to apartment, city to city, always chasing better opportunities. He paused for a moment. Eventually, I realized I had become very good at building houses for other people while never really finding a place that felt like home. His honesty filled the room with a quiet warmth that had nothing to do with the candles. Until that moment, I had only seen Logan as confident, successful, and completely put together. Listening to him now, I realized that even someone who seemed to have everything figured out could still be searching for where they truly belonged. The lights suddenly returned, filling the room with bright white illumination. We both blinked before laughing at how quickly the peaceful atmosphere disappeared beneath ordinary reality. My mother and father returned home a few minutes later, followed shortly by Mason, and the house immediately became lively again. Yet as dinner continued around the familiar table, I caught myself looking toward Logan more often than I intended. Nothing visible had changed between us, but something inside me quietly had. For the first time since he walked through our front door carrying those suitcases, I stopped seeing only my brother's lifelong best friend. Instead, I began seeing the thoughtful, genuine man who had somehow made an ordinary evening without electricity become one of the most memorable nights of my entire summer. The following weekend arrived with an unusual kind of quiet. My parents left early Saturday morning to visit my grandparents on the other side of the state, and Mason drove south to spend the weekend with several college friends. Before leaving, my mother handed me a short list taped to the refrigerator. Water the garden, bring in the mail, and remember to feed the neighbor's golden retriever while they were away. You boys can handle 2 days without us, she said with a smile before climbing into the car. The front door closed, engines disappeared down the street, and suddenly the entire house belonged only to Logan and me. We looked at each other for a brief second before laughing. Well, Logan said, folding the grocery list into his pocket, I guess we are officially in charge. The morning passed peacefully. We divided the chores without even discussing them. Logan trimmed the hedges and repaired a loose hinge on the backyard gate, while I watered the flower beds, answered a few emails from my internship supervisor, and finished another illustration that had been waiting on my laptop for days. Every so often we crossed paths in the kitchen for a glass of water or exchanged a few casual comments before returning to whatever we had been doing. There was something strangely comforting about how naturally we worked together. Shortly after noon, Logan looked into the refrigerator and smiled. I have an idea. I raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? Only if you dislike homemade pizza. 2 hours later, flour covered half the kitchen counter. Tomato sauce somehow ended up on my sleeve, and we were laughing so hard after my first attempt at tossing pizza dough that I nearly dropped the entire thing onto the floor. Logan demonstrated the technique with surprising patience before handing the dough back to me. Try again, he encouraged. The secret is confidence. Easy for you to say, I replied. You make everything look simple. He shook his head. Not everything. You just usually see the finished version instead of the practice. That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. It reminded me that the calm, capable version of Logan I admired had not appeared overnight. Like everyone else, he had simply spent years learning through mistakes no one else remembered. After lunch, we carried 2 cold glasses of lemonade onto the back porch while the fresh pizza cooled inside. Warm summer sunlight filtered through the maple trees, and the neighborhood felt wonderfully peaceful. We watched butterflies drift across the garden while a gentle breeze moved through the tall grass beyond the fence. This place is beautiful, Logan said quietly. Your parents built something special here. I nodded. I always thought I wanted to leave as soon as I graduated. He looked at me with curiosity. Do you still feel that way? I thought for a long moment before answering honestly. I am not so sure anymore. The afternoon continued at an unhurried pace. We walked to the neighborhood park to feed the neighbor's dog, stopped by a local bakery for fresh cookies, and slowly wandered home carrying paper bags while talking about everything from favorite movies to childhood dreams. Somewhere along that walk, I realized I had stopped measuring time by hours. Instead, I noticed conversations, shared laughter, and comfortable silences. That evening, after dinner, we sat on the living room floor assembling an old wooden bookshelf my father had never gotten around to building. Every time one of us misunderstood the instructions, the other laughed instead of becoming frustrated. By the time the final shelf was secured in place, the room looked better than it had that morning, and the accomplishment felt oddly satisfying. As we admired our work, Logan smiled and folded the instruction booklet. "You know," he said, "I have lived in a lot of places over the past few years." He looked around the quiet living room before meeting my eyes again. "This is the first house that has ever started feeling like home before I even unpacked everything." His words settled gently between us. I smiled without fully understanding why my heart suddenly felt lighter than it had only a few weeks earlier, but deep inside I knew one thing with complete certainty. The house itself had not changed at all. The person sharing it with me had quietly changed everything. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm our household had quietly developed over the past few weeks. Logan was already in the kitchen, preparing coffee when I came downstairs, and without saying a word, he slid my favorite blue mug across the counter before returning to the breakfast he was making. The gesture was so natural that I accepted it without thinking. Only after sitting at the table did I realize how easily we had settled into routines that no one had ever discussed. "You are getting predictable," I teased with a smile. Logan glanced over his shoulder while flipping scrambled eggs in the skillet. "Is that a compliment?" "I think it might be." He laughed softly. "Good. I was hoping consistency was not becoming boring." Somehow it was exactly the opposite. There was something comforting about knowing he would always remember how I liked my coffee or that I preferred toast instead of pancakes on weekday mornings. Those small details should not have mattered as much as they did, yet I found myself noticing every one of them. Later that afternoon, Mason returned home from work earlier than expected and immediately stopped in the doorway of the living room. Logan and I were sitting at opposite ends of the couch, reviewing one of my latest illustration projects while discussing possible improvements. "Wow," Mason said with exaggerated surprise. "Should I come back later, or have you two officially started your own design studio?" I rolled my eyes. "We are just working." Mason folded his arms with a playful grin. "Funny. Every time I come home lately, you two are either cooking together, fixing something together, or talking about books together." Logan chuckled. "That is what happens when people live in the same house." "Sure," Mason replied dramatically. "That must be the reason." Before I could answer, he headed upstairs still laughing to himself. I shook my head. He never misses a chance to tease me. Logan smiled warmly. "Brothers usually do not." Even though I laughed along, Mason's words lingered quietly in my mind for the rest of the evening. Was it really that obvious how much time Logan and I spent together? Had everyone else noticed before I had? The questions followed me into the next few days. Every ordinary interaction suddenly felt different because I had become aware of it. When Logan asked whether I wanted to stop at my favorite coffee shop after his office closed, I caught myself smiling before I answered. When he complimented one of my finished illustrations, I found myself replaying the conversation later that night. Even simple moments like washing dishes side by side or walking to the mailbox somehow stayed with me longer than they should have. One Thursday evening, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sunset while trying unsuccessfully to sketch the changing colors across the sky. Logan stepped outside carrying 2 glasses of iced tea and quietly placed one beside me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Not at all. For several peaceful minutes, neither of us spoke. The neighborhood was calm, and the only sounds came from birds settling into the trees and distant laughter drifting from a nearby park. Finally, Logan looked toward the horizon and said, "You have been unusually quiet this week." I hesitated before answering. "Have I?" He nodded gently. "You usually tell me whatever idea you are working on. Lately, it seems like you are thinking about something else." I smiled awkwardly. "Maybe I am just trying to figure a few things out." Logan accepted the answer without pressing further. "Take your time," he said softly. "Not every question needs an immediate answer." His patience somehow made the silence between us feel safe instead of uncomfortable. As the last light of day faded beyond the rooftops, I realized the questions I was avoiding no longer had anything to do with my future career, graduate school, or summer plans. For the first time in my life, I found myself wondering why one person's presence could make an ordinary day feel brighter, why his laughter lingered in my thoughts long after conversations ended, and why the idea of him eventually moving into his own apartment no longer felt like temporary good news, but instead like something I was quietly beginning to dread. The days that followed felt strangely different, although nothing visible had changed inside our house. Logan still left for work every morning with his neatly packed messenger bag. I still spent my afternoons working on freelance design projects and preparing for the upcoming semester. We still shared breakfast, exchanged easy conversations over dinner, and occasionally spent the evening watching old movies with my parents. From the outside, everything looked exactly the same. The only difference was the conversation that had quietly begun inside my own mind. I found myself noticing details that had never seemed important before. I noticed how Logan always held the front door open whenever someone carried groceries inside. I noticed how he remembered everyone's favorite coffee order without asking twice. I noticed that he always thanked my mother after every meal, even when she reminded him that he was practically family. Those habits were small, almost invisible, yet they revealed something much larger about the kind of person he was. One Friday afternoon, I received an email confirming that one of my illustration projects had been selected for a local student art exhibition later that summer. Excited, I hurried downstairs to tell my family. My parents congratulated me immediately. Mason playfully claimed he had always believed I would become famous one day. And before anyone else said another word, Logan looked directly at me with unmistakable pride. "I knew they would choose your work," he said. "You earned this." His confidence in me felt strangely personal, as though my success genuinely mattered to him. That evening, he insisted on stopping by a neighborhood bakery after dinner. When we returned home carrying 2 small dessert boxes, he placed one in front of me with a grin. "Every accomplishment deserves a proper celebration." I laughed. "It is only a student exhibition." He shook his head. "No achievement is small when someone worked hard to earn it." We ate chocolate cake on the back porch while the summer sunset painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. Conversation drifted naturally toward future goals. Logan spoke about eventually designing community spaces where people genuinely enjoyed spending time together instead of buildings that simply looked impressive. I admitted that I wanted my illustrations to make children feel safe, curious, and hopeful whenever they opened a book. He smiled thoughtfully. "That explains why your drawings always feel warm." I looked at him with curiosity. "You really think artwork can feel warm?" "Absolutely," he answered without hesitation. "Buildings can feel welcoming. Music can feel peaceful. People can make a room feel brighter simply by walking into it. Why should art be any different?" His words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Later that night, I returned to my room intending to finish another illustration, but instead I found myself staring at a blank page while replaying every conversation we had shared over the past month. Somewhere between grocery store walks, handwritten morning notes, homemade pizza, candlelit conversations during the power outage, and evenings on the back porch, Logan had quietly become the first person whose opinion I genuinely wanted before making almost any important decision. That realization should have frightened me, yet it mostly left me confused. I had always assumed I understood exactly who I was and what my future would look like. Until recently, I had never questioned those assumptions. Now I was questioning everything, not because Logan had asked me to, but because simply knowing him had gently challenged ideas I had accepted without ever examining them. The next afternoon, I decided to clear my thoughts with a long walk through the neighborhood park. The familiar trails usually helped me organize complicated feelings, but this time every answer seemed to lead back to the same person. As I returned home near sunset, I found Logan sitting alone on the front porch reading one of the novels I had recommended only a week earlier. He looked up, smiled with genuine warmth, and held the book slightly higher. "You were right," he said. "This story gets better with every chapter." I smiled as I climbed the porch steps, suddenly realizing that the sentence described far more than the novel resting in his hands, because without either of us fully recognizing it yet, our own story had quietly reached the point where turning back no longer felt possible. Another week quietly slipped by, and before any of us realized it, Logan had become woven into the rhythm of our family in ways that felt completely natural. My father asked for his opinion before starting small projects around the house. My mother automatically prepared an extra lunch whenever she packed meals for work. Even Mason, who never missed an opportunity to tease either of us, had started calling from work just to ask whether Logan wanted to watch a baseball game later that evening. Somewhere along the way, the word guest no longer seemed to fit. One warm Saturday morning, Logan suggested we drive to the local farmer's market to pick up fresh vegetables for dinner. "Your mom mentioned she wanted to make vegetable soup tomorrow," he said while grabbing his car keys. "We might as well surprise her." I agreed without hesitation. The market was already busy when we arrived. Families wandered between colorful produce stands. Children carried homemade lemonade. Musicians played soft acoustic songs near the entrance, and the entire neighborhood seemed to slow down beneath the bright summer sunshine. Logan stopped at nearly every booth, asking local farmers about their produce, and somehow remembering details from conversations only minutes earlier. Watching him interact with complete strangers, I noticed the same quiet kindness he showed everyone at home. He never rushed anyone. He listened carefully. He thanked people sincerely. Those simple habits somehow made ordinary conversations feel meaningful. While comparing tomatoes at one stand, the elderly owner smiled warmly at us. "You boys make a good team," she said while placing fresh basil into our shopping bag. Logan looked toward me with an easy grin before answering. "I think we do." The comment was innocent, yet I felt an unexpected warmth spread through my chest. I quietly blamed the summer heat and focused on carrying the grocery bags back toward the car. On the drive home, we stopped beside a small overlook where the Seattle skyline stretched across Elliott Bay beneath a perfectly clear blue sky. Logan leaned against the wooden railing for several peaceful moments before speaking. "I used to think success meant constantly chasing the next opportunity," he said. "Now I am beginning to think it is finding people who make ordinary days worth remembering." I looked out across the water, pretending to admire the view while his words settled somewhere much deeper than I wanted to admit. "You sound like someone who has been doing a lot of thinking," I replied. He laughed quietly. "Living here has given me time to think about things I ignored for years." We stood there in comfortable silence until my phone vibrated. It was my mother asking whether we had remembered the fresh herbs. I laughed and held up the shopping bag. Mission accomplished. That evening, our family gathered around the dining table once again. Conversation flowed easily as always, but Mason suddenly looked between Logan and me with an amused expression. "You know," he said while reaching for another slice of bread, "you two have started finishing each other's sentences." I nearly dropped my fork. "We do not." Logan smiled into his glass of iced tea. "Maybe a little." My parents exchanged quiet smiles without adding anything, and the conversation quickly moved on to another topic. Later that night, I found myself unable to sleep. I walked downstairs for a glass of water and noticed light spilling softly from beneath the guest room door. Before I could quietly return upstairs, the door opened. Logan stepped into the hallway holding a book in one hand. "Could not sleep either?" he asked. I shook my head. "Too many thoughts." He smiled with gentle understanding. "Sometimes life changes so gradually that you do not notice it until one day everything feels different." I looked at him for a long moment because his words described exactly what had been happening inside me. I still could not give those feelings a name, but for the first time I stopped trying to convince myself they would simply disappear. Instead, I quietly accepted that whatever was changing inside my heart had become just as real as the peaceful house surrounding us, and I knew that pretending otherwise was no longer possible. The following Monday began like every other morning, yet something invisible had shifted inside me after our late-night conversation in the hallway. I no longer spent my energy pretending my feelings were simply confusion that would disappear with enough time. Instead, I accepted that Logan had become the person I looked forward to seeing first every morning and the one whose quiet presence somehow made every ordinary day feel a little brighter. Accepting that truth did not immediately answer every question, but it finally allowed me to stop running from them. Summer continued moving forward, and the calendar reminded us that Logan's temporary stay would soon come to an end. His apartment downtown was almost finished, and every phone call from the property manager felt like another step toward the day he would pack his boxes again. No one else seemed particularly concerned. My parents were happy he had found a permanent place. Mason joked about finally getting his best friend back without sharing him with the rest of the family, and Logan simply smiled whenever someone mentioned the move. I smiled too, but every conversation about his apartment left a quiet ache that I kept carefully hidden. One evening, Logan returned home carrying a rolled set of architectural drawings under one arm and 2 paper cups from my favorite coffee shop in the other. He handed one to me before I even asked. "Thought you could use a break," he said. We carried our drinks onto the back porch where the familiar wooden chairs overlooked the peaceful garden. The late afternoon sun painted everything with warm golden light, and for a while we simply listened to birds singing from the maple tree near the fence. Finally, Logan spoke. "My apartment should be ready in about 3 weeks." I nodded slowly. "That is great news." The words sounded right, but they did not feel true. Logan studied my expression for a brief moment before looking back toward the yard. "You do not sound very convinced." I laughed awkwardly. "I guess I just got used to having you around." He smiled gently. Honestly, so did I. Those 5 words settled into the quiet between us with surprising weight. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Instead, we watched the evening breeze move through the flowers while distant laughter drifted from a nearby park. After several minutes, Logan spoke again, his voice thoughtful and calm. "When I accepted this job, I expected to rent an apartment, go to work, and start over in a new city." He shook his head with a small smile. "I never expected your family to remind me what home actually feels like." He paused before adding even more quietly, "And I definitely did not expect one particular person to become the best part of every day." My heartbeat quickened. I was not completely certain what he meant, yet something in his voice told me those words carried more than simple gratitude. Before I could respond, Mason opened the back door and stepped outside holding a bag of hamburger buns. "Good," he said cheerfully. "I found both of you. Dad wants help with the grill." The moment passed as naturally as it had arrived, replaced by the ordinary sounds of family preparing dinner together. We carried plates into the backyard, laughed through another relaxed evening, and listened while my father told stories from work. Everything looked exactly the same as countless family dinners before it. Yet I noticed Logan smiling at me across the picnic table more often than anyone else. Later that night, after everyone had gone inside, I remained alone beneath the stars for several extra minutes. I thought about the life I believed I wanted before Logan moved into our house, the person I believed I was, and the future I had imagined. None of those expectations seemed as certain anymore. For the first time, I understood that the biggest change in my life had never been sharing my home with my brother's best friend. The biggest change was realizing that somewhere between ordinary breakfasts, quiet conversations, and peaceful summer evenings, my heart had already chosen a direction long before my mind had found the courage to admit it. The next few days passed with the strange feeling that time had suddenly begun moving too quickly. Every morning seemed shorter than the one before. Every evening ended sooner than I expected, and every casual conversation reminded me that Logan's move to his new apartment was approaching. His moving date was now less than 2 weeks away, and although no one in the house treated it like a dramatic event, I quietly counted every remaining breakfast we would share, every evening coffee on the back porch, and every ordinary conversation that had somehow become the best part of my day. One Saturday morning, my father asked whether Logan and I could help deliver several boxes of donated books to the local community library. We loaded the boxes into the back of my father's pickup truck and spent the drive talking about everything except the subject both of us seemed to be avoiding. The weather was bright and clear, and downtown Seattle felt alive with weekend visitors enjoying the sunshine. After unloading the books, we wandered through the library together, stopping to browse new releases and beautifully illustrated editions displayed near the entrance. Logan picked up a hardcover architecture book while I drifted toward the illustration section. A few minutes later, he quietly appeared beside me holding a novel in his hand. "You recommended this one a few weeks ago," he said. "I finally bought my own copy." I smiled. "Did you like the ending?" He looked at me with thoughtful eyes. "I liked the part where both characters finally stopped pretending they already knew all the answers." We left the library carrying our books and decided to walk through a nearby botanical garden before heading home. The peaceful pathways wound between colorful flower beds, quiet ponds, and shaded benches where families enjoyed the warm afternoon. As we walked side by side, Logan suddenly slowed his pace. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." He hesitated for only a moment. "Have I made things complicated for you?" I looked at him, surprised by the question. "Why would you ask that?" He smiled faintly. "Because lately you seem like you are carrying around thoughts you never used to have." His honesty made it impossible to hide behind easy answers. I looked toward the small pond where sunlight reflected across the calm water before speaking carefully. Maybe meeting the right people changes the questions we ask ourselves. Logan remained quiet, giving me all the time I needed. I used to think life was simple. I continued. Graduate, find a job, move into my own apartment, and everything else would naturally fall into place. I laughed softly. Now I realize people can completely change the picture without meaning to. Logan's expression softened with quiet understanding. Sometimes they change it for the better. We continued walking until we reached a wooden footbridge crossing a narrow stream. Standing there together, surrounded by late summer flowers and the peaceful sound of flowing water, the silence between us felt unusually meaningful. Finally, Logan spoke again. When I first moved into your family's house, I promised myself I would never overstay my welcome. He looked directly at me. Now I find myself wishing time would slow down. My heart tightened because his words echoed exactly what I had been feeling for days. Before I could gather the courage to respond, my phone rang. My mother was calling to remind us to pick up fresh bread on the way home. The ordinary interruption made both of us laugh, gently breaking the intensity of the moment without erasing it. We stopped by the neighborhood bakery before driving back to the house, carrying warm bread through the front door as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet throughout dinner, every accidental glance across the table seemed to last a little longer than before. Every quiet smile carried a meaning neither of us was ready to explain aloud. And as I lay awake that night listening to the peaceful silence of the house, I realized that the future I feared was no longer about Logan moving into another apartment. It was about wondering whether I would ever find the courage to tell him that somewhere between shared breakfasts, ordinary weekends, and countless small moments, he had quietly become the person I never wanted to say goodbye to. The week before Logan's scheduled move arrived with surprising speed, and every ordinary moment suddenly felt more valuable simply because I knew there were only a handful of them left. Morning coffee tasted the same. Dinner conversations sounded just as familiar, and the evening light still settled across our backyard exactly as it always had. Yet everything carried a quiet awareness that time was moving forward whether I was ready or not. Logan never complained about packing, and I never admitted that every folded shirt placed into another cardboard box felt strangely personal. One Tuesday evening, I came home from meeting a classmate to find several neatly labeled moving boxes stacked beside the guest room door. Logan was kneeling on the floor, organizing books into separate piles. When he noticed me, he smiled with the same warmth that had become such a natural part of my days. I figured I should start before everything becomes last minute, he said. I nodded, trying to match his calm expression. Need another pair of hands? I would appreciate that. We spent the next 2 hours wrapping dishes, organizing shelves, and carefully packing framed photographs from different stages of his life. Every object seemed to carry a story. There were architecture textbooks covered with handwritten notes, photographs from college, postcards collected during business trips, and small souvenirs from places he had visited over the years. While placing several books into a box, I noticed one resting by itself on the bedside table. It was the novel I had recommended during his first week at our house. You never packed this one, I said. Logan looked toward it and smiled quietly. That one stays close until the very end. I laughed softly. Because it is your favorite now? He shook his head. Because it reminds me of where this chapter of my life really began. His answer lingered in the room long after he returned to sealing another box. Later that evening, my mother called everyone downstairs for dinner. The table felt especially lively as my father shared stories from work, and Mason jokingly announced that he intended to help Logan decorate his new apartment, whether Logan wanted the assistance or not. Everyone laughed, including Logan, but I noticed that his smile faded slightly whenever someone mentioned moving day. After dinner, my parents went for their usual evening walk, while Mason left to meet friends, leaving only the two of us in the backyard once again. We carried mugs of tea onto the porch, where the familiar wooden chairs overlooked the quiet garden glowing beneath soft porch lights. You have been quieter than usual, Logan observed gently. I looked down at the warm cup in my hands before answering honestly. I guess I do not like endings very much. He considered my words for a moment before speaking. Maybe this is not an ending. I looked toward him with quiet curiosity. He smiled thoughtfully. Sometimes people think changing an address changes everything. I am only moving 15 minutes away. I laughed despite myself. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous to worry. Your feelings are never ridiculous, he replied calmly. They matter because they belong to you. The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to look away. For several peaceful moments, neither of us spoke. The evening breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the yard, while distant crickets filled the silence with gentle rhythm. I realized then that what I feared was not the extra 15 minutes between our homes. What I feared was losing the effortless closeness we had quietly built together over the past months. As the porch light reflected softly across the garden, Logan looked toward the stars before speaking almost to himself. Some people enter your life expecting to stay for only a season. He smiled with quiet hope before meeting my eyes again. Then one day they realized they have been hoping for something much longer. My heart recognized the meaning before my mind found the courage to answer, and for the first time I began to believe that perhaps I was not the only one standing at the edge of an important truth waiting to be spoken aloud. Moving day arrived beneath a clear blue sky that seemed almost unfairly cheerful. The weather was perfect, the traffic was light, and everyone in the house was in good spirits except me. Logan's apartment was finally ready, and after weeks of talking about it, the day had quietly become reality. My parents prepared a large breakfast before anyone touched a single moving box. My father insisted that no one should carry furniture on an empty stomach, while my mother reminded Logan at least 3 different times that he was always welcome to come back for dinner whenever he wanted. Mason joked that he had already claimed the best parking space at the new apartment, and Logan laughed at every comment with his usual calm smile. I joined the conversations, smiled when everyone else smiled, and tried not to think about the fact that the guest room upstairs would be empty before sunset. By late morning, the moving truck was loaded. We drove downtown together, unloaded furniture into Logan's new apartment, assembled bookshelves, arranged kitchen supplies, and unpacked enough boxes to make the place immediately feel comfortable. The apartment overlooked a quiet street lined with trees, and warm sunlight filled the living room through wide windows. It was everything Logan had hoped for, and seeing him genuinely happy should have made me feel completely relieved. Instead, I found myself quietly missing the familiar rhythm we had shared every day. While my parents and Mason went downstairs to collect the last few boxes, I remained inside, helping Logan place books onto a shelf. The room grew unexpectedly quiet. Logan picked up the novel I had recommended months earlier and smiled before sliding it into the center of the bookshelf. "It belongs here now," he said softly. I nodded, unsure whether I was talking about the book or something much larger. He looked toward me for several seconds before finally speaking. "Ethan, there is something I have wanted to tell you for a long time." My heartbeat immediately quickened. He took a slow breath, choosing every word carefully. "When I accepted this job, I expected to leave with a better career and a new apartment. I never expected to meet the person who would completely change what I thought home meant." My eyes remained fixed on his because I suddenly understood exactly where the conversation was going. "The hardest part about moving today is not leaving your parents' house," he continued quietly. "It is wondering whether I am leaving the person I most hope will remain part of my life." Every fear I had carried for weeks disappeared beneath the honesty in his voice. I smiled, feeling a surprising sense of peace replace the uncertainty that had followed me all summer. "You are not leaving him," I answered gently, "because he has been hoping you would say that for a very long time." Relief spread across Logan's face before he laughed softly, almost in disbelief. Neither of us rushed the moment. We simply stood there smiling, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and shelves that still needed arranging, quietly realizing that the answers we had both been searching for had been waiting between us all along. A few seconds later, Mason's voice echoed cheerfully from the hallway. "Are you two organizing books or writing another chapter?" Logan laughed and called back, "Almost finished." We exchanged one more quiet smile before carrying the final box into the living room together. That evening, our entire family celebrated with homemade dinner inside Logan's new apartment. The conversations sounded exactly like they always had, filled with laughter, teasing, and familiar stories. Yet everything felt different in the best possible way. As the evening came to an end and everyone prepared to leave, Logan walked me to the apartment door. "Breakfast tomorrow?" he asked with an easy smile. I laughed. "You are only 15 minutes away. I think we can manage breakfast." Walking back toward the elevator, I realized that nothing important had truly ended that day. One address had changed, but the place where both of us felt most at home had quietly become wherever the other person happened to be. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both new and wonderfully familiar. True to his promise, Logan appeared at our house almost every Saturday morning, carrying fresh coffee and pastries from the neighborhood bakery. Sometimes we spent the day exploring Seattle, visiting bookstores, walking along the waterfront, or discovering quiet cafes hidden between busy downtown streets. Other weekends we stayed home, helping my father with small projects, joining my mother in the kitchen, or simply sitting together on the back porch talking as the afternoon slowly faded into evening. The only thing that had changed was Logan's address. Everything that truly mattered remained exactly where it belonged. As summer gradually gave way to early fall, I returned to college while Logan became increasingly busy with several important architectural projects. Even with our schedules growing fuller, we continued making time for one another in small but meaningful ways. He still sent me a short message every morning wishing me luck before classes. I still shared new illustrations with him before showing anyone else. Our conversations no longer depended on living beneath the same roof because they had quietly become part of our everyday lives. One crisp October afternoon, the student art exhibition finally opened. Friends, professors, and local artists filled the gallery, moving from one display to another while discussing different styles and techniques. I tried to appear calm, but my nervousness became obvious the moment Logan walked through the entrance carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. He smiled the instant he found me standing beside my artwork. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "I would not have missed this for anything." Throughout the evening, he listened proudly as visitors complimented my illustrations and asked questions about my creative process. Every time I glanced across the room, I found him smiling with quiet encouragement that somehow made every conversation easier. Near the end of the exhibition, one of my professors approached us. "Your partner has been telling everyone how hard you worked for this opportunity," she said with a friendly smile before walking away to greet another guest. I looked toward Logan with amused surprise. "My partner." He laughed softly. I did not correct her. I smiled back, feeling a peaceful certainty settle inside my heart. Neither did I. A few days later, we returned to the familiar overlook above Elliott Bay, where we had once talked about ordinary days becoming worth remembering. Autumn leaves drifted gently through the cool afternoon air while ferries crossed the water below. We leaned against the same wooden railing, quietly watching the city continue its busy rhythm beneath the clear sky. Logan turned toward me with the same calm expression that had first welcomed me into this unexpected journey months earlier. "Do you remember what I told you here?" he asked. I nodded. "You said success was finding people who make ordinary days worth remembering." He smiled. "I was right." I laughed softly. "You were." We stood there together without needing to fill every silence with words because the quiet itself had become comfortable. Looking back, I realized the biggest moments in our story had never been dramatic. They were handwritten notes beside a coffee maker, shared breakfasts before work, conversations during a power outage, afternoons building bookshelves, evenings watching sunsets, and countless ordinary days that slowly revealed extraordinary feelings. Love had not arrived all at once. It had grown patiently inside simple routines until one day it became impossible to imagine life without it. Sometimes people expect life-changing stories to begin with spectacular moments, but ours started with a guest room, 2 suitcases, and a family willing to open their front door. Everything that followed came from kindness, honesty, patience, and the courage to recognize that home is never only a place. It is the person who quietly makes every ordinary day feel complete. And every time I hear the familiar knock on our front door before another weekend breakfast together, I smile because I remember the day my brother's best friend moved into our house, never realizing that he was also quietly finding his way into the future we would eventually build side by side.